everybody, welcome to the Patriot Show. I'm your host, Anthony Stephen Malone. Today I've got a very special guest in the United States who's come onto the show, Meaghan Mobbs, graduate of West Point Military Academy, Bachelor of Science, and a scholar, Tillman. Hello, Meaghan. How are you doing?
Good. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure having you on the actual show, especially with someone with your background and experience. Matt, for the viewers who don't actually know a lot about you, can you give them a very brief overview of who you are, please, and your qualifications?
Absolutely. So I grew up with two military parents. My father is a Vietnam veteran. My mother was one of the first women to go to Airborne school in the United States. And so I followed their path. I went to West Point, which is the United States Military Academy. I did a tour in Afghanistan. I met my mentor over there, who was one of the first psychologists for CAG, for Delta, our Tier 1 Special Operations. He encouraged me to pursue study in the psychological field. So I left active duty. I went and got my master's in forensic psychology from George Washington University. And then now I am finishing up my PhD in clinical psychology at Columbia University, where I actually do a lot of research around the experience of being in the military, but specifically I look at the experience of leaving active duty and transitioning into being a veteran, or to being a veteran, or going back into the civilian sector.
Well, that is a very, very brief overview there. I've seen the qualifications and I know what experience you've got as well. Because you come from an airborne family, for want of a better word, I just want me viewers to know you're not just talking from an academic point of view, which you can, very, very highly qualified, but you've also got the experience there as well. So when you're talking, it isn't just off a paper, you've experienced it. So I think that's very important that as well. Your personal experience, I know you've done a lot in the military, but how did you find the transition from being in a military environment coming over to civilian street?
So I struggled with it. I think a lot of people do. This is something that I said my research is focused on. It's a particularly challenging time for a lot of people. I struggled with it in that I had a really hard time kind of leaving active duty, that sense of community, that sense of purpose, and moving into almost immediately into academia. And so I really struggled to find people I could relate to. My husband is also active duty. I can remember sitting in one of my evening courses. My husband was deployed to Afghanistan at this time. It was like his 5th deployment. And I can't quite remember how it came up, but it was a young gal sitting next to me. And she looks over at me and she goes, "Oh, wait, we're still in Afghanistan?" And the disconnect between what she knew that was happening within our military and what she was experiencing and what I was experiencing from my own personal life there's just a massive disconnect. So I really struggled to find community within that space. But over time, as I was able to kind of build that out, it became much easier.
Yeah. Did you find, because you come from a military family, and it is actually amazing to find out that your mum was the first airborne, right? I'm airborne, but it's just, that is incredible. To come from an airborne family anyway, and have the pedigree that you've got, and go on to do what you've achieved in academia as well, is it's a bit unusual, for want of a better word, on that one. How did you find your upbringing, your military, because you come from a military family? Did you always know you wanted to be in the military? Was it like a tradition?
So the joke is that it's our family business is the military. So a little bit, yes. But also I didn't know anything different. It was what I grew up with. You grew up hearing reveille in the morning. We would all the kids would be playing outside in the evening. And when we would lower our flags at 5, they play music, and every kid knew to stop and stand and put their hand over their heart. And it was just something I grew up with. It wasn't, I didn't really know anything different. And so 9/11 happened. September 11th happened in the United States. My father was still active duty. He was serving in the Pentagon on that day. I was in high school, and the aftermath of that and what happened, I realized that I wanted to serve in some capacity. I actually looked at the time and enlisting as a 68 whiskey, which is a combat medic. My parents were like, we want you to, we encourage you to go this route, that's what you want to do, and look at a place like West Point if that's what you're interested in. And so I did a summer kind of like invitational for rising juniors to go see there and see what it's like and see if that's they're interested in going through that kind of life change. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with everything from the tradition and the regimented lifestyle, and just how much everyone there seemed to feel like imbued with this sense of purpose and meaning. And I was like, I want that. Like, I want that, whatever that is. And so I kind of knew pretty quickly that was the route I wanted to go.
Yeah, it's to actually be there at West Point. I wasn't at West Point, but I've got a lot of friends that have, and I've been there and I've visited friends there as well. It's an amazing experience. To see it's got a lot of history there as well, that I thought was fantastic. So what drives you? What motivates you? Because you are a very driven individual.
So really what drives me, so you were asking before about my parents. So my father, just to kind of give a quick background, my father's a Vietnam veteran. He saw substantial combat there. He was awarded multiple awards for valor. He served over 30 years as an infantryman. So kind of the tip of the spear. He was in special operations for a period of time. And he never really struggled with what we would call today post-traumatic stress disorder. But he got off active duty. And there was, even though he was going into a very, very well-paying job, he had a family that loved and supported him. He had everything that you think you would need in order to have like a perfect life. And it was the first time I really saw him struggle, that kind of loss, that pulling away of the identity of being a warrior or in the military, the loss of that, and that loss of community, like I was speaking about before. I had to bear witness to that. And that's really what began to at least kind of give me the drive to say that there's something more. Like PTSD, it's very insidious, it's absolutely real. And are we missing something broader? Is there something, at least for the American veteran space, the advent of the all volunteer force? We got rid of the draft and everyone's volunteered. We've been at war for 2 decades now, you guys alongside of us. Is there something more here that's happening that's causing distress for veterans? Is it more than just exposure to trauma? Is there something else that might explain why we're seeing such levels of suicide or dysfunction? And that's really what drives me. How do we begin to find out those dark places so we can shine light on them to get people the help they need?
I think you brought on something. I had to stop and think about this the other day, because I'm organising coming over for the 20th anniversary of September the 11th. I'm meeting a lot of friends in New York who we've served with, and it's 20 years ago. When people step back and think about that now, 20 years since 9/11 and Afghanistan. Some of the people who I speak to or I train now were not even born then. Yeah. That's trying to get into perspective that it's been a long conflict. In your opinion, I know now a lot of people are more open about talking about transitioning from the military into civilian street, but just in the past 20 years, I think it's come on a long way. There's been some incredible work done by all governments and a lot of military charities and individuals. But I still feel as if, from a personal point of view, I think there is still a lot of work to be done there in understanding it. Because I think a lot of the guys now who have done, like, they're only quite young and they've done multiple tours of like Afghan and Iraq. And when you do a tour now, you will see combat. There's no two ways about it. You will be out there, you will be downrange, and you will see it. The good things, the bad things, and everything in between as well. So when these young guys and young ladies are coming home, I think it's important that there's more of an infrastructure there to help them in the United States and in England as well. What's your personal thoughts about that?
I couldn't agree more. And some of the things that we're seeing in America, and I'm less well versed on what's happening in England, so I apologize for that. But we saw this kind of massive surgence of veteran service organizations, VSOs is what we call them here, which are kind of they're veteran charities, and typically have a mission of beginning to address all of these things that perhaps the government isn't doing a great job. And we have now over 43,000. And the problem with that is when you have that many people operating in a space, you actually have no idea what's going on. It becomes very murky. And so that's one of the things, is the ability to connect veterans to resources becomes problematic. But also there's kind of the other problems, which is kind of like rampant misinformation at times, or people who mean well but end up not kind of executing in a way that is doing good for veterans. But more importantly, I'm a huge proponent of, we have got to get left of bang. We cannot be reactive. We have to be proactive in how we begin thinking about mental health care. We have to begin tying physical health with psychological health. We know that, and I'm sure you know this, being on the tip of the spear, it is just as important that your mind is as healthy as your body. You're a better operator when everything's functioning together. And if we don't begin equating the two, we're never going to get where we need to be. So I'm a huge believer, and we need to be training psychological first aid alongside combat buddy aid in our basic training, that we need to be giving a language and a lexicon to our leaders in the military. They can talk about it in a way that's destigmatized, but it's like a car, right? You don't just take your car to the shop when a warning light comes on. You know that you have to do periodic maintenance, you have to check your tires, and that's how you keep your car going. It's not just when things are falling apart that you get it checked out. And so we need to make sure that we're teaching that.
That's one of the first times I've heard that. A lot of us talk about it behind closed doors, but the way you've just put that there in layman's terms is so very important. There's operators out there that keep themselves physically fit, tip of the spear, end of, but psychologically, some of them are battling. Some of the guys on ops at the moment, I actually know, and they are really battling, but they don't tell anyone, because they're like, we don't really want to speak about this, so no one does. But I think what you said there is thinking of it like an engine. You've got to keep it going, not just the inside, not just the body, but your mind as well. If your mind's sharp and clear, the whole package comes together, and it makes you a better operator, and it makes you better at your job. But it gives you the tools that people need from a psychological point of view to deal with everything as well, rather than bottling it all up, locking it away until they come out, then everything coming out in one hit. So thank you very much for bringing that up there. That was a very good point. I think me viewers will understand that, where we're coming from there as well. You've also written, I'm just going to touch on this because I know we could speak for hours about this. You've written a lot of papers and you've published an awful lot. One of them is Beyond War and PTSD. Can you give us a little bit of an inkling about that, please?
Yeah, so it's exactly what we kind of talked about a few moments ago. It's saying that, again, we know that PTSD is insidious. We know that war can create trauma. We know that absolutely happens. And there is another subset of the veteran population who, by the way, may also have PTSD, but who struggle in the transition off of active duty into the civilian side. And the reason why could be any number of reasons. It could be because within military service, we are socialized to be a certain way, whether it's being, like you were just saying, you know, we suppress our emotions. It's highly adaptive. It's super effective on the battlefield.
Yeah.
We know that fear is contagious. We don't want fear spreading amongst our ranks when things are hitting the fan on the battlefield. We want to be very calm. We teach emotional suppression, but that suppression may not be effective when, let's say, you're getting, you know, maybe your child has fallen and, you know, they got banged up and your spouse is looking at you for some kind of emotional support. Maybe in the moment, suppressing that reaction is important, but in the aftermath, being able to have like a conversation and display emotion around that to create bonding, that's important. And so we don't teach those skills. Like you're talking about tools and toolboxes. Yeah. We don't teach those skills. And so there's that. There's also just, you know, when you enter the military, at least in America, it's during a period of what we would call emerging adulthood. It's 18 to 25. And very normatively, we're asking ourselves all of these existential questions. Who am I? What do I believe in? What are my value systems? How do I see myself in the world I'm in? And our military, and I'm sure yours is the same, they give very ready answers. Like for us, it's duty, honor, country, right? God Corps Marines, mission first, all those things that are kind of given to you. And so you don't have to go through this exploration. And then when you leave the service, maybe some of those things don't make sense anymore. And maybe they actually never were congruent with who you thought you were, what you believed in, or maybe they all were, but it doesn't translate as effectively to a new job. And so Beyond War and PTSD is looking at kind of this crucial role of transition stress, how much that transition matters psychologically, and how we have to begin doing what you were saying before, applying resources to that. So it's not just trauma-focused therapy. There's still stigma. As much as we try to do away with it, there is stigma. But maybe if it's focused more around transitioning off the active duty or shifting the warrior mindset, we may have a better impact with some of our veterans. So that's really what that paper is about. It's about addressing that gap.
I think, yeah, it's interesting, for want of a better word. If anyone wants to read any of your papers, where can they find them?
So I try to put them a lot on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn profile. I also write for Psychology Today, which is a very large kind of psychology blog under the heading The Debrief, which is tackling modern day veteran challenges. I write for them about any number of veteran things, and so they can find it there. You can also, unfortunately, Google my name, which is a scary thing to say, but you can find some resources there. And if anybody ever reaches out over LinkedIn and asks for a copy of anything I've written, I'm always happy to send that to them as well.
Okay. I've got a lot of your writing anyway. So if anyone is interested out there, which I've got a feeling they actually will be after seeing the interview, if you drop me a private message, I'll get some papers over to you as well. That is not a problem, and you'll find it very interesting. To come back to one of those points there, do you think because people generally don't think about mental health while they're in country, downrange, you don't speak about it, you're there to do a job. Do you think one of the ways that we could address this, to keep people, keep the mental health of the warriors out there even in better shape, is to start to address this in country as well as out of country? I know I'm going to be very politically correct, and there's going to be more people out there that say, no, you shouldn't ever do that. You're there to do a job. Yes, we're there to do a job. But sometimes you need a little bit of help. Doesn't matter how good you are being a soldier, being there, doing it, saying you got the t-shirt. Sometimes the younger guys or the older guys might just need a little bit of a helping hand. What's your thoughts on that?
And so I should mention my husband's still active duty. He's an infantryman. He was a ranger. So I very much believe in the primary job of our military is to eliminate our enemies. That is our primary focus, right? Is lethality. And we have to be very very careful about how do we begin having conversations that allow us to be the most lethal. That's where I think the problem is that we've equated mental health with weakness, when the idea is that we've said before, you get that on target, we're actually a more lethal fighting force. And the reason why we're more lethal is because if you're self-aware, then in those moments, you're more apt to be situationally aware if you're internally aware. So kind of a point about you were saying about being politically correct, I'm absolutely all about lethality. And what we know, we've learned this. Actually, the Brits learned this. We learned this during World War II. Forward psychiatry is critical. And what's the worst thing we can do is pulling our guys and gals off the front lines and putting them back in the rear permanently. That causes more problems. By pulling them off temporarily, giving them a kind of a quick checkup, maybe triaging if necessary. Do they need an elevated level of care? Do they just need a quick break from being at that high up tempo or in that kinetic atmosphere? Break, put them right back. Put them right back with the unit. And the reason being is because those kind of bonds, that going back there, it can be healing in some ways. Now, you obviously can't do anything about bullets flying or IEDs or anything like that, but we know about the psychology. We know from learning this again in World War II, forward psychiatry was critical. Unfortunately, the Americans forgot. We had to relearn that lesson again at Vietnam. We forgot it again, and we had to relearn it in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is that when we put our mental health kind of embedded there and have those resources, we actually have better outcomes. And so this isn't to say that, we should be doing kumbaya circles when you're on an objective, when you're on an X, right? You can't do that. Let's be honest.
We're not saying that. We're saying this won't interfere in getting the job done in the day. We're there to do the job. But I think the point you've made is If we can help to sharpen an operator's mind, it makes them an even more effective. Then when they come
Exactly.
away, they're able to deal with things a lot better, rather than guys who have done 7, 8, 9 tours, who are still quite young as well. They come away and they don't know how to deal with everything they've done and seen, which that speaks volumes, because the suicide rate amongst veterans in just America since September the 11th is phenomenal. I was a bit taken back by all of that, because we've got issues in England, but it is nowhere near on the scale of what you've got it over there. And obviously, with me spending a lot of time with the American military and special operations, I get to see a lot of the guys who I know, who I was down range with, and some of them are really struggling. Some of these guys are highly decorated combat veterans who ring me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're in absolute tatters. Put them on the battlefield. They're some of the best soldiers I have ever had the honor to fight alongside. Put them in civilian straight. Yeah, whole different kettle of fish there, I think, on that one. What other, I know that there isn't a quick fix for any of this. It's going to take time, a lot of time, and a lot of effort from a lot of other people. What other things do you think that are not being done now, in your experience, could be done to help our soldiers while they're serving, and veterans as well?
Absolutely. So, and to your point too, it's interesting you mentioned about like some of the operators. I was just on another kind of talk with Master Sergeant Leroy Petrie. He's a Medal of Honor recipient, which is our highest form of valor you can be awarded in the United States. Former Ranger, threw a grenade back to save his fellow Rangers while he was shot in both legs. And he was speaking today on a call earlier about how he sought care for PTSD and how critical it was for him in his marriage. And so you're absolutely right. You can be an operator and still obviously have all of these kind of demons that you're wrestling with. And to your point about what we can begin doing, it's sometimes about having conversations. Exactly what we're doing now, exactly what Master Sergeant Petrie is doing, is talking about it. That it's not mental, like seeking care for mental well-being isn't weakness. Again, it is about you're actually sharpening another tool. It makes you stronger. And then from a more kind of procedural perspective, there is a psychological first aid is something that already exists. It's often used in humanitarian situations to help triage those who are experiencing effects of these. So we should be teaching that in basic training, like our version of basic training, because it shows that this is important. We take this seriously. That's one thing we could do. Two, this, we talked about kind of forward psychiatry, being honest about what that looks like, having them forward always as part of making sure that's the whole warrior concept, making sure that they're part of that. And then when we transition out, we're required to go through a like kind of week-long called Soldier for Life Transition Assistance Programming TAP. It's like a week-long course. It's mandated now by Congress for American service members. And within that week, there is not a required or mandatory module on health and well-being. And the rates, so we talked about rates of suicide being very high. Some of the other things are the massive weight gain that a lot of veterans experience, going from being very fit, working out all the time, having a kind of clear diet, to no regiment anymore, and they gain a massive amount of weight, which, as we know, has a lot of health implications. So having a required course on health and well-being and what that looks like and what resources are available could begin to bridge some of those gaps.
Yeah, I agree there. Everything you've said there as well. It is nice to speak to someone who isn't just academic. They've experienced it. You've lived it. You've seen it for yourself, and it comes over as well. So, thank you for coming on. A lot of veterans are going through a very hard time across the United States at the moment. They're going through a hard time anyway, but because of COVID, it's affected a lot of families, and people always think about the veteran. This affects the families, the spouses, wives, girlfriends, and the children as well. The whole family unit, PTSD or stress, depression, it affects everything. If you could reach out and speak to anyone out there and give them a message, what would that be?
You are not alone. That would be the first thing, is that there are so many people who have experienced that, and there are resources that exist to help address any of those different things. It takes courage to speak out, but if you are any family member of someone who's been that, you're already very strong. So having the courage to sometimes speak out is imperative, but also that there's so many that are afraid to speak out for fear of stigma or shame or losing that relationship. And the thing I always say is that sometimes it's the question of whether or not you want to preserve the relationship or you want to have them alive. And if having them alive is the more important thing, then sometimes you have to make that hard call. And that can be getting them the help they need, or it can be you saying, you know what, this is my boundary, and I'm, you know, until you seek care, this is going to be what's right for me and for our children or for our relationship. So just knowing that you're not alone and there are resources, I think is the first step. And then ask yourself the question, what is more important? Is this person alive, or that we maintain what may be a facade of a healthy relationship?
Yeah, I think it's. I think what the message is anyone out there, man, woman, anyone who is any vets from any services as well, not just the military. This includes the emergency services as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going through an hard time, pick up the dog and bone, pick up the phone and speak to somebody. Speak to a veteran. Speak to a pal. It's not a sign of weakness to say you're going through a bit of an hard time. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Being there, seen it, got the t-shirt, talk from experience here, right? Picking up the phone, having a chat with somebody makes all the difference. Or if you see somebody who you know who's going through an hard time, don't wait for him to pick up the phone. Call round, see him.
Yes.
Right? The other thing is, if you are going through a bit of an hard one, don't stay cooped up in your flat or your house. Get your boots on, get your trainers on, get your jacket on. Go out for a walk in the countryside, little bit of physical exercise, go for a walk, you'll feel a lot better for yourself. Would you like to say anything about that, Meaghan?
I couldn't have said it better. That was fantastic. Break that isolation, get out, get connected, get some vitamin D in the sunshine, or being outdoors is critical. And those two things. Yeah. And if you ever reach out to your buddies, always pick up that phone, whether it's a text or a call, that can literally save a life.
Exactly. Don't forget what Meaghan just said there. It can save a life. If you know someone who's going through an hard one, give them a bell. And sometimes it's the people you least expect as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ones who always got a smile on their face, who you think nothing ever affects them. Sometimes they're the ones who need a bit of a chat. It's not a charity. It's a veteran. It's a soldier talking to another soldier, or a sailor, or an airman. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just don't be alone. Reach out. It's important. It matters. Right, Meaghan, I'm gonna close down the interview for the time being. Thank you so much for coming on to this show. Would you like to say anything else?
Not at all. It's a pleasure. We all served alongside each other for the past 20 years of war. Like we said, we are in this fight together here on this side of the Atlantic, and I know over there. And the more that we are talking and connecting and building resources and bridges to community, I think the stronger we all are as a community.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for coming on the show, and thank you from all the viewers at Patriot. Very informative. There was a lot of information in there. I think a lot of good people can take away from the interview as well. Meaghan, if you can just stay on the line for a couple of minutes while I close down. All my viewers out there, thank you for watching the Patriot Show. It's been emotional, as always. Please stay tuned for a couple of minutes and watch some adverts and trailers for veteran-owned businesses across the United States and the United Kingdom. Stay safe, everybody, and I will see you on the next show. Take care. Bye-bye.